Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome back. It is me, Cyber Warrior. This is CyberWarriorStudios, and we are on Security Happy Hour. Now, as always, I have with me my partner in crime, the founder of Raices, and a good friend of mine, Eric Bellardo. And with us today, joining us for the second time, actually, is Cody Bernardy. So if you want to go check out his About Him, go ahead. Feel free to watch the older episodes after this one's over. But today is all about enterprise vulnerability management. And with everything going on, I do not want to talk the hot button. Look, we're not talking thumbnail gate. I fixed the thumbnail. Okay, Eric, I fixed it.
Come on, help me out here.
Yeah, I don't know, Derek. I don't know if you like Eric so much. It took a lot of berating for you to change the thumbnail. And I actually think it's only fair to Eric if you go back and change all your other thumbnails and put them on.
Hell no, that'll take way too long. I am not pulling that shit. Eric, you want them that bad? You fix them. I'll send you the Photoshop file. You can go back and fix them all. But no, so, I want to talk enterprise vulnerability management because, Cody, that's actually what you brought up and a lot of what I do today. I work both sides, but primarily I stick in enterprise and vuln management, whether it's developing programs or working on SIM. It's kind of a little bit of everything and helping them gear it towards their organization. So I'd like your take right now on the state of vulnerability management and how organizations are approaching it, or how they're actually going about doing it. And if you see they're getting better, or is it something that they're still kind of missing the mark on in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, so a little bit about my experience. I'm currently at my third Fortune 500 company doing VM and it's all over the place. So a lot of companies I feel like are mainly focusing on incident response, the reactionary stuff, and vulnerability management is kind of reactionary, but it's mainly proactive. So finding vulnerabilities and such like that. So I would say the larger, Fortune 500 companies, VM is starting to become part of their security group and all that. So I'd say it is an up and coming niche in security. There isn't really too much content out there as far as like what's online to self-learn and all that stuff with VM, because it's very niche and it's nuanced and it's really nothing you can really practice at home.
Yeah, I definitely, I have to agree with you there because it is a lot of what you're going to see is IR. And it's unfortunate because we're so reactionary in the way we approach things, not so much looking at the preventative measures. Now, I think when a lot of organizations think preventative, they go buy the new EDR or next generation firewall, but they're not getting the teams to support it, which make it even worse. So they're putting the blinky lights in place, but they're not getting the actual team that knows how to use it or gets trained on it or whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. So, IR has become really huge, and a few of the other places I worked, I was in with, kind of worked IR for them. And I think that if we can get better at vuln management, IR would become more of a, we're going to have someone on retainer, but we're not as worried because we know we're doing the right things. We're doing our due diligence. And I think vuln management is going to play more into the insurance side of things than IR.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Some insurance providers do even ask for, do you even have any sort of scanning setup in place? Because there's a lot to it. Like if you're looking from the outside in and you think vulnerability management, you think we just run Nmap and see what we find, but it is a lot more than just running a simple scan. There is policy, there is prioritization of vulnerabilities. And one thing you'll come across a lot, especially at these larger and more, these older companies, is someone can own an asset for their entire career at that company and they leave and no one even knows that it's still on the network, or it might be on the network, or it might be an asset that the organization owns, but it's like an AWS. So like you can't scan RFC 1918, and you got a public S3 bucket with all your stuff in it. So
yeah, and I think I've been dealing a lot with AWS. I think AWS, Azure, collectively have come a long way in the vuln management side of things. They're implementing a lot of capabilities. One of the shortcomings I have found of the AWS side of vuln management is for something like Security Hub, or when you're running Inspector and this, at the third, everything they provide you is with their own UID. So unless you have some type of mapping or know how to go look, if you're running this from an organizational level, let's say, and you look at, and I could be wrong, I could be missing something, but if you look at like a vulnerability and it'll say, hey, this is critical, go fix this this EC2 because of this problem. It's like, okay, but the EC2 name it gives you is that I dash a bunch of digits, instead of, hey, we assign this host name to it, so we're going to give you that information. So that may change as you do more host-based checks, but from the network reachability standpoint, none of the common names that are stored in AWS are what it shows you. It's all UID.
Yeah, and on the flip side with AWS, they have pretty good integrations with like Tenable and Qualys, where you could set up like a connector. So it's basically like Qualys is logging in on your behalf on like AWS, so it just keeps like a running inventory of whatever's on that account. So especially like on a enterprise scale, people will spin up an instance, and then to patch it, they just replace that instance, and in Qualys, it will remove that terminated instance and stuff such like that. But that's cloud-based stuff is difficult kind of in some ways, but I feel like on-prem is more of a challenge, given that there's not a single point of contact with some assets and such like that.
Well, let me add some things as you guys are discussing some enterprise points of views from my side of the house. So every single speech that I give on vulnerability management or security operations, I always use this phrase: you can't secure what you don't know you have. So vulnerability management is garbage in, garbage out if you don't have a good asset inventory. So if you don't know what you have, you can't scan it. And so it becomes an issue of, what do you have? Where are those assets, both on-prem and cloud? You've got the new pieces with the Azure cloud, where you have the Microsoft Defender Vulnerability Manager, and it does a good job at identifying the policies and the vulnerabilities, and now they're adding the SBOM pieces in there. But that, if you don't know what you have, cloud, on-premise, hybrid, whatever you have, if you don't know your assets, you don't know where to scan, what to scan, how to scan it. So we got to think about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then asset management, or management as far as ownership goes too, because like you can have this giant list, and I've seen in the past, like, well, we have all these assets. Well, who owns them? Like, we don't have an agent on them. We don't have creds to authenticate to them. Like, you can't patch a host you can't access, and typically you have to resort to network access controls and stuff like that.
Yeah,
exactly. And at the end, vulnerability management is identifying, is the identification piece. It's what we do after we identify that we've got a vulnerability there. We have a vulnerability. Now we have to patch it. Who owns it? Who manages? Who's got access to that box? Look, I was in a federal agency, and we found, through scanning, doing Nmap and doing Qualys, and we identified this IP, and we look, we found it in a closet, an Apple IIe. I was running a database.
That's lovely.
Nobody knew who
and
owned
that's well, and that leads me to another point of, I think the organization still solely like isolate security, whether that be your vuln management, SecOps, whatever you want to call them. They're all isolated, and when you're looking at IT and trying to manage your IT infrastructure, whether that's asset management or whatever, you do have to know what you have in order to be able to secure it and do a vulnerability management. But that also goes into patch management. And what I have found is some organizations don't actually have an IT team, or they do, but it's an organization where they don't necessarily manage everything or patch everything. They leave it up to asset owners to do their own patching.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another part of the issue, is where it is on a thumbnail. I don't want to hear it. I even put the new one on YouTube. So get off my ass there. But yeah, and if you're only listening to this on audio podcast, you're missing out on some good times. You need to be watching come back and watch the YouTube after. But they you need to integrate all these, and I think IT needs to have your sysadmins, your help desk, your patch management. I honestly think organizations need to have a sole IT department that works hand in hand with security, because when you have all these rogue IT areas that stand things up, then it makes it very hard to do asset management and patch management and all this other stuff, because security is going to say patch this, but if you have no one up higher to say, okay, we're going to patch it, then it makes it difficult.
Yeah. And so I'll bring some experiences coming from everyone's favorite bookstore. I'm not going to name the name, but it's a large bookstore that typically likes to get into things like pharmacy and cloud services. I'm not going to name names, but anyway, so the way that we did asset management is like anytime someone wanted to spin up a host, they can't just like download VMware and just run it. There's like a whole process where it's kind of like metadata associated with that host. So like you fill it out, it all auto populates with your name and kind of your management chain, and you kind of leave like a little description. So when you hit submit, you could check out like an instance or anything like that, and instantly we have metadata on who owns it, the management chain, who manages that host. So when stuff shit hits the fan, and they're not in an auto patching group, which I could talk about in a bit. We have that data right there, and it the turnaround from release of vulnerability to that host actually being patched actually met SLA. But there's corporate SLA, and that very rarely, in my experience, actually gets followed, unless it's like Log4j this past week.
And
why did you have to bring that up? I was avoiding that topic.
In one of the manage, we have a weekly meeting that we have the network team, the endpoint team, the workstation team, and the vulnerability management team, after their weekly scans, provides the information to this team. So we've got the SecOps team that works with the server teams, the different server teams, the different workstation teams, and tells them the patches and the criticality. And we do a risk-based approach that we'd say, these are the vulnerabilities, this is the exploitability, and then we say these are the criticality. So we don't just go and use the traditional CVSS, it's a 10, you must patch. Well, yeah, it might be a 10, but the exploitability is 0, So it's like, we use these numbers like, CVSS scores, and the CVSS scores V2 and the V3, but we have to look in our own environments and say, is this going to impact us? How much is it going to impact us? Do we even have these devices in our organization? So it's first identifying that we have those devices. How likely is it that we're going to be hit? And then what is when we put all these numbers, which one rises to the top? Yeah,
that's a really good point. So the CVSS thing, I'm like not a fan of. It's a starting point, but it's not the end game, because Microsoft, and I like throwing them under the bus every freaking second Tuesday of every month. Patch Tuesday, they always say under active exploitation, but they never provide evidence of said active exploitation. Like if one person was popped from this vulnerability and this exploit, but it was like a targeted attack. Like that's not, in my terms, active exploitation. Log4j, I'm sorry, I'm saying it again, is active exploitation. You can go on Gray Noise, type in the CVE number. I mean, you got to be pretty dumb to think that's not active exploitation. But this Patch Tuesday a couple days ago, I mean, pick any of those CVEs, and if that says active exploitation, go on Gray Noise and see if there is anything on there. If there is, then yeah, go ahead and treat it as such. But and then also, like you said, you know, you might have like a CVSS10 under active exploitation, but if that's like a device on your network that, you know, the only way to access that device is through like a secured cage, and it's not even plugged in anywhere on the network, is it that much of a risk? Is it that much to pull the fire alarm?
Well,
you know, go ahead.
That comes back to when a lot of machines were going end of life, or like when XP and Vista and all these were going EOL. Some of these machines were pulled completely off the network. They were literally standalone machines, but people are like, oh, you got to fix XP, or you got to, you know, we got to replace this. We got to replace it. And it's like, dude, it ain't even plugged into my network. Like, it could stay there. Like, I literally have a local login. And look, I am the first one that says patch your shit. Like, you should update as soon as you can. But the reality of it is, in a business, you can't do that. And I think with vulnerability management, we tend to get away from this business enablement. We like to go to, oh, do this now, which is where your vulnerability management programs and, you know, how your timing for patching and things really come into play. Because let's be honest, a critical vulnerability, a lot of those are very much so exploitable. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. There's POCs out there, and they've been out there for a while, you know, unless it's a 0 day. You know, a lot of these critical vulns have been out there, but you don't see companies rushing to patch with these out there. Like, you will see organizations that have left critical vulns on their system for months, but then all of a sudden Log4j or Print Nightmare comes out, and because it hits the media, now all of a sudden they're like, oh shit, I got to fix this like 2 hours ago. You know, like, so it's really a big, it changes I think the media still, even with IT, like, for some reason we push certain things and not others. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the critical vulnerabilities, there's a lot of races out there that never get the attention that something like Log4j or you know, Print Nightmare got.
Yeah, and so my like go-to for that is companies are probably you know, freaking out over this Log4j stuff, and it's like, have you checked to see if you have any other CISA top 400 exploited vulnerabilities on your network? I'm sure you have more cases of that than you do Log4j. Those are actively exploited. CISA says, like, they provide guidance on how to patch these things, and it's, yeah, I mean, to your point, like, once it hits CNN or Fox News or whoever, like, yeah, the board of directors and insurance companies are going to be asking for some answers. But yeah, I mean, you probably don't know you have like Sig Red or some like vulnerability that's like a couple of years old on your network, everywhere on your network, but it's not in the media right now.
Yeah, and that's and you know, we talk about exploitability, Heartbleed, Eternal Blue, all these other things, and it's funny. And here's what I find comical is Rapid7, and don't get me wrong, when it comes to what I look for in a vulnerability like scanning software. So you look at Rapid7, Tenable, Qualys. I never got my hands on Qualys, but I've used Nexpose and Insight VM a lot. And I've used Tenable between my time in the military and, you know, in corporate America. And I think Rapid7 gives you a great ability to drill down into assets or find assets that something like Tenable SC does not. Right? Like, searching for an asset in Tenable SC is damn near impossible. You have to go to the asset group and know which asset group it's in and go all the way down. I have not found a search function, Eric, so don't give me that look. I've looked for the search function and I can't find it. But Tenable IO is a completely different beast. And Tenable IO has been completely rebuilt and is an awesome system.
Yeah.
Rapid7, whether you're in a local console or in the cloud, is the exact same as far as, hey, I'm going to type this IP in. It's going to give me an asset and I can see everything on it. Or I'm going to type a host name in. And then it'll have the tags and everything there. But Tenable SC, their local console, it just doesn't have that same ease of let me just find an asset or a vulnerability. You have to dig through everything to really find what you're looking for.
Yeah, and I'm actually kind of the opposite. I've never used Insight VM or anything Rapid7 other than Metasploit. But Tenable I've used a little bit on some pen testing engagements. Yes, I know VM is not pen testing, but they wanted us to use it for some reason. But mainly, like, I'm a Qualys guy through and through, and I got to give some love to Qualys. Out of Tenable and Qualys, I find them the easiest to use, especially with the global asset view and dynamic tagging. It is so nice.
And then the Rapid7 gives you a lot of that too. The dynamic tagging, and like there's a lot Rapid7 gives you, and Qualys probably gives you. Like I said, like you never use Rapid7. I've never used Qualys, but we've both used Tenable. And as good as Tenable is, I think both of us have been stuck with Tenable Security Console or Security Center. I've not got to play with .io, but I've heard great things about .io. Eric might be able to chime in and give some feedback, because he's had a lot to say, it looks like, with his faces about Tenable.
Well, no, I've used all three devices, VMs. I started out before with Saint and Satan, and the Greenbone and all those other that transitioned and became Rapid7 or Tenable or anything like that. So each one has a different flavor, and each one has a great application for different things. I'll give you a perfect example. In the NERC environment, where it's a very, compliance-based, Rapid7 is a great tool. Okay. Meanwhile, in a more corporate environment, in manufacturing and others, Qualys is an amazing tool. I mean, in healthcare, and so it depends on where you are and what the use is, and as well as the process. Okay, because one of the things that I was going to talk to you guys about, and I can hear the conversation, is, what are these vulnerabilities that we're looking at? Your threat intelligence, your OSINT, the things that are out there is going to drive what you're going to do with vulnerability management. And so you've got to see the different teams. OSINT, threat intelligence, gives you that early warning that this is coming. Vulnerability management validates, identifies, and qualifies those things and says, here you go. We've identified that you do have this vulnerability. It's widespread, or only this area, or whatever it is, application, network, software, hardware, whatever it is. And then you move it over to your patch management, security operations, network operations, server operations, any of the teams that need to apply those patches. And then you've got your GRC or your VM team that are tracking that remediation, and then the circle starts again. And that's how we do it in NERC, in the National Electrical Resiliency. So you have to do that circle, identify, validate, patch, and then test again, and then the circle continues.
Well, and I think that validation step is what's missed a lot. That validation step is what we skip. And so we had that problem with one of the clients I work with, where they did have the vulnerability initially, and it was like, dude, I patched it, I did everything what was said, but it's still coming up. It's giving me a ticket every month because, this, that, and the third. What was happening is, and what people weren't realizing, is some of these patches weren't cleaning the system. So those DLLs that your vulnerability management programs and tools like Tenable and Rapid7 and stuff like that, what they were scanning for were these DLLs or something else, and that file wasn't being removed. So when that file wasn't removed or still showed an old date, it was like, hey, you still have this on your system. Meanwhile, they didn't. It was just an old file that was hanging around.
Listen, we had an issue just about 3 years ago with a major East Coast electrical company. and they patched everything. But guess what? They didn't restart the servers. So
God
the
bless
patches
Windows.
never got applied. So they did the work, but they missed the last step. So when they validated, the patches weren't there. And the teams were saying, look,
Yeah.
we did the work. Here's the work. And then they found out that they needed to apply that last step. But in the NERC environment, the power environment, and the manufacturing environment, you can't restart some of these devices because it'll stop your production. So it has to wait until they have a downtime for those plants or those areas. So vulnerability management becomes a very hard beast to apply. So that's why this, new focus on having multiple devices, and that redundancy, because you can then say, A, bring it down, bring back up A, and then B, bring it down, and then we're fully patched. But a lot of organizations do not have that maturity yet. And that's the challenge, is that we have a lot of organizations that are on step A, they're right now starting to think about, how do we do this cybersecurity workflow? And they are just checking the block and saying, yes, we're scanning. Yes, we're patching. Yes, we're doing this, but we're not full mature.
Oh, I thought I was on off mute. Yeah, the biggest hurdle I have to come across is the reboot. Like, it's so easy. Like, especially if you, I can't speak for Tenable or Rapid7, but they have a little tool called Patch Management. It's a module in Qualys, and you could just push patches out or run a script to download a Debian file or whatever it is, but it requires a reboot, and no one wants their stuff rebooted for whatever reason. So, I mean, it's a great point. And then at that point, like, you do all this work, but they say, well, we can't take this system offline. Well, that, I mean, to my eyes, that's a vulnerability in itself. If we're so reliant on this one system that it can't go offline, a denial of service attack, which is typically a lower rated vulnerability, someone exploits the denial of service vulnerability. Well, IR is going to have a fun weekend, and digital forensics is going to have a fun weekend, and they're going to be like, well, VM, what's up? It's like, well, here we go. Like, can't reboot the damn thing. So.
Yeah, but you'll see that I've worked with a lot of different organizations that is a huge problem. Actually, wasn't it 2.16 that had the DOS with it? Because now they're coming out with 2.17.
2.15 is the one that's vulnerable. Everybody's telling you patch to 2.15, but that one now is vulnerable to DOS. So now they're saying 2.16, where now they're saying
no, you got Eric, get caught up. 2.16 has a DOS.
2.16 has a different DOS. That's a second vulnerability, and now they're getting ready to deploy 2.17.
Yeah, it keeps going. Look, every time they know it. The funny thing is I think it's either 1.6 or 1.7. They removed, I think it might be 1.7. They completely removed JNDI. Yeah. They removed that stack because they were like, screw it, we're done. We're not even leaving it open anymore. We're out of here.
Yeah, and I will say this is probably one of the biggest problems. We just ran into it right now, is information gets skewed between people. Like, you're saying 2.17, Eric's saying 2.16. Like, there's all these sources of information. So as a VM team, you have to choose what's your source of truth. Is it CISA? Is it NIST? Is it MITRE? Is it Eric? Is it Reddit? Like, you got to choose and stick to it. And so
I'm in the raid forums. You'll find your source of truth. If somebody says they found a way around it, I guarantee they got a POC that has a way around it.
Go on my Discord and you'll find all sorts of valuable information as far as Log4j goes. So I'm on Log4j's site right now, and I could private or I could send you a message to. Oh no, I sent you a message to it. So if you wanted to throw it on your screen, so it says CVE 2021-45046. This is moving from 215 to 216, and it says 215 was incomplete. Blah 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 blah. It was a denial of service, but it says JNDI lookup pattern resulting in an information leak and remote code execution. This is in 215. So this is the one everyone just spent last weekend patching, is susceptible to remote code execution in a very specific environment. Now, me knowing, my previous experience, people are going to see that and they're going to start poking at it. And now 2.15 is going to be, the CVSS 10. It's on gray noise, and weekend number two of doing this shit is going to happen again. So Apache's mitigation, they say Java 8 or later users should upgrade to 2.16. Java 7 users should upgrade to 2.12.2. Otherwise, you can remove the JNDI lookup class using this one-liner. So
yeah, that command came out with the original vulnerability was, hey, just put this into a text file or a log, whatever it was, their conf file. Mm-hmm. Put this into a config file for it to read. Don't do this lookup. Make it false. And it's a mitigation effort. It's not a remediation effort. And I'm like, you know what? If it stops it, it stops it. Whether it's mitigation or remediation, as long as they can't do it, that's all that matters at this point.
Yeah. I mean, as VM, we're always the ones that say patch to the latest version. Like if that was the case, I would not have a job. Like everyone's just like, oh, let's just upgrade to 2.16. Oh, 2.17's out. Okay, just upgrade. But I mean, there's nuances to all this. I mean, everything security is nuanced, but yeah.
And that's what I wanted to talk about, because we were talking about reboots. And here's where it comes down to knowing your organization and why it's important and why there are patch cycles and things like that. Removed JNDI lookup from the class path. Yeah, that's true. There are organizations where even if they have redundancy, it's more of like a warm node. It's not a hot node. So if they reboot, it's still going to take time for that other node to come up. So it's there, but it's to minimize downtime. Mm-hmm. So there are organizations that I've worked for, especially in like retail and things like that, where if you reboot that system, they're losing money because they can't, take credit cards, or they can't do this out of the third. So that's why they have patch cycles, which set aside this downtime for these systems to be rebooted. Unfortunately, that leaves things like this out there for the next, I don't know, when's your next reboot cycle? You're looking at what? A
monthly.
It's past Tuesday, so it's only monthly. You get like once a month to reboot your shit.
Well, think about I'm just gonna take this at the very high level. The power generation teams, okay, that are out there, talking about nuclear or other organizations, they have one downtime a year. One. So what are these vulnerability teams going to do? They have to build a wall around it.
Yeah.
Well,
compensating controls.
Don't they have a lot of gold disk images too? So even a lot of their shit comes in quarterly. It doesn't even come in on reboot. Because I know there's a lot of systems out there in the government that you get a gold disk image. So your patches get applied via image, not via, hey, I'm going to download and install this. And I've seen that even on like unclassified systems. I've seen that on a lot of systems where it's, here's a gold disk, use this to patch your shit. And you're like, and hospitals fall victim to that a lot. And a lot of other like of these organizations where they're not the software owner. They may be the hardware owner, but not the software. The software comes from a third party, and you have to wait for the third party to give you the shit to patch it. And you're like, well, I'm screwed for the next 6 months to a year. Okay.
At DEF CON, you guys have the healthcare village. And one of the things that people don't know in the industry, we know it in the industry, but the people out there don't know, is when you go into a hospital and you look at a thing like that device that does your what call it, your
Blood pressure.
infusion pumps. Infusion
Your
pumps.
infusion.
Okay. When Philips or any of the big manufacturing companies build this, they put the software in there. It goes into the hospital. It might have the original software that's in there. Nobody patches the devices for very little time. So they come with there's some devices out there with embedded XP.
And that's when we talk hospitals. And Cody, I'd love to get your take on this. When we talk hospitals, I find hospitals are the most vulnerable. Beyond of any critical infrastructure that they exploit just to exploit. Let's look at all the gas. You could look at all the gas pipelines and stuff that have been hit recently. But I think hospitals are the most vulnerable for that reason, because they have a lot of equipment that gets put in play, gets connected to the network, whether or not it's an isolated network. At the time this shit was put into place, your network segmentation didn't really exist. There was no zero trust. There was no network segmentation. So some hospitals can't afford either A, to replace the equipment, or B, to even do the network segmentation. They can't isolate this stuff well enough. So how can hospitals really put in a vulnerability management program that can keep them, I'm not going to say 100% secure, because we all know that that's impossible, but keep them secure enough that at least these systems that are of vital importance are monitored, because we can't patch them, but we can monitor them.
Yeah, and so the way I would go about that is looking at doing a little bit of threat modeling. So, I don't work in a healthcare environment, so I don't know like what system names are called. But I mean, if they're plugged into a network and they're running Windows XP, like that's kind of silly in my opinion. But if it has to be that way, that has to be that way. But we got to boil it down. Like a lot of these people that are exploiting these vulnerabilities, they're doing it over the internet. So the best way I would go about it, especially if like a hospital is to bring me in as a consultant, is I would be curious to see. I mean, they might not even know this. Like that's the challenge of being in VM. Like if I ask them, like, what's your public IP space looks like? What kind of email protections you have? Do you have I'm brain farting right now. I'm having a brain fart right now, but anyways, like email protections for like anti-phishing and stuff like that. Do you have like basic stuff like AV installed? That's where I would start, because these ransomware groups, they can't. I mean, they can, but they're more likely not going to fly to a hospital and plug in a thumb drive into a network or something like that. So I'd work from a network level and kind of work down.
So we've had I've spent part of my career in healthcare. The one challenge that hospitals have is that their staff for IT and cybersecurity is usually very limited. I'm talking less than 5 people for a big hospital. Okay. And their segmentation is their patient records system, which has to go through HIPAA, the security rule compliance. And they do have, to have AV and segmentation and things of that nature. But it's very basic security. HIPAA security rule, not the privacy rule that everybody talks about. Oh, you violated my HIPAA rules. No, the HIPAA security rule is very basic. It's less than 117 questions. That's it. So you don't have that much compliance in there. So that's why you see all these hospitals getting ransomwared, because the email systems and the controls that they have internally are just basic network security controls. So some hospitals are better, usually the ones that have been already ransomwared, but they don't have that. And then the segmentation between they're usually air gapped, where you have patient and devices. So sometimes there is that, sometimes they're not. So it is a very vulnerable area. And doing vulnerability management, they get very scared because if I scan these devices that are being used for patient care, is it going to knock them off the network? And if you're getting an infusion and your thing drops off the network,
yeeks. Yeah, and to kind of go back to your question, Derek, is I think, especially with Jen Easterly, the new CISA director, healthcare is considered by the DHS critical infrastructure. I think it's 17 sectors they consider critical infrastructure, and I mean there might be one out there. I'm not in that sector, so I don't know. But having kind of like an information security sharing center for healthcare and kind of making it like a mandate, not a mandate like the hospital. Like, I mean, there's going to be hospitals like in a town of 600 people. It's going to be hard to tell them like you need to purchase this $100,000 Qualys license or whatever. But the government being like, if we're going to deem this particular sector as critical, we need to provide resources to these smaller hospitals, and actually just all hospitals in general. If we're going to say it is critical health, okay. So I figured there was one. So that's great. That's good. That's good.
Yeah, and so we talked about
you've got that, but because they don't have the resources to take the information and act, that's the part that's missing. There is the information for health. There is HIMSS. There is, all these different organizations for security of healthcare. But it's that final mile. Are we applying these things?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and what I have noticed though is how you talked about hospitals that some are doing really good and some are like not there. I'd like to get your take on this because people think Facebook, YouTube, email, like personal email and stuff like that are all, needed to just get through your workday, right? If you're sitting at a computer or this at the third. I have come across quite a few hospitals where they don't even have email. And it is honestly like because when I've had to like send my records or do something with records, I'm like, look, can I bring in a thumb drive? Can I email you? Can I do any of this? They're like, we don't have email. We don't take thumb drives. I'm like, well, I don't have a fax machine, and the Army takes forever to send anything anywhere, and so does the VA. So, all right, I'll see you in 3 months after you get my records. Like it sucks, but I understand, right? As someone in security, I get it. But do you think, I don't feel it is bad for people to at work, especially in a critical field like the hospitals, to not have email and not have access to a lot of these social networking sites and sites that can distribute malware. Do you guys think am I wrong? Like, should they have this or should they not? From a vulnerability management perspective of hospitals, what's your take on it?
That's interesting. I've never really thought about that. I know, I mean, not in a hospital environment, but I do know, and this wasn't so much VM, it was more network access and network teams. Like they'd block pastebin and stuff like that. Like definitely, like if you're able to access pastebin from your corporate network and you have if you're not on security, you shouldn't be going on pastebin and uploading stuff like that. But Facebook, like I'd be curious to see like how much malware actually gets distributed on there. I feel like most people are.
It's not from Facebook itself. It's from the links that people click from there.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it difficult. Look at how many, all the account takeovers, which me and Eric have been, have talked about quite regularly in the past few months. And I got another one I got to work on now. These things happen because of links that get sent and different information and stuff like that. So if someone works in a hospital, you go on to like a Facebook and click a link. If they're not monitoring that site and you get a drive-by download, then you're screwed.
So
I just think the openness of that type of communication.
Yeah. So I can actually, I could think of a situation. So from my experience working at that large bookstore, they had at least at the warehouses, they had a section for employees to browse the web that is a completely separate network. They're able to go to that computer, step away from work, so they're not, around patients or anything like that, or in this case, in their work environment, and they're able to go on Facebook and do whatever they want. And let's say there is a download of some random, file or anything like that. That file could spread through like those 4 computers, but there's a physical network separation. So, I mean, yeah, go ahead and infect those 4 Windows 10 machines. Ooh, you got you got ransomware from us or something. Like, yeah, good luck with that. So that's probably what I would propose. I mean, I do, especially in healthcare, like our healthcare workers they have a really stressful job. And if Facebook is
sure.
like, if Facebook is their way to just like decompress from work for 30 minutes, there's a way to, fulfill or, to allow them to do that. But I mean, if they're logging patient data on the cart and then they click a tab over and go on Facebook or whatever, I don't think that should, I mean, outside of security, I feel like there could be some overlap of patient data accidentally getting pasted into a Facebook chat or something like that. So that's how I would go about that.
Yeah, so it's more or less keeping it away from the medical computers.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's something I can get behind, where your corporate or non-connected devices, or like you said, those 4 computers. So maybe in a break room, because they have, when you're on call and things like that, you have these rooms that you can sleep in. So rooms like that having computers, but it would cost more. But I would even say a completely separate ISP line coming in that has no connection to your network whatsoever. It's legitimately like being at home. Like all right, give them free reign to the network. If those computers go down, they can't get anything because it is just a private network within, that use. I would still secure it because you never know what people are going to do. But at the end of the day, it is used for basically personal use while you're there to do those things.
Yeah, and it's like I mean, Eric, you work in power, so it's like the OE environment, and then you have just kind of like everything else. So the OE environment in a hospital would be, whatever hospitals need to sustain life, and then you have the Facebook computers and stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So in terms of vuln management, where do you think the separation lies, and how much interaction do you think you should have between the teams? Because I think, in my opinion, that is vastly missing, is this communication between your security and then your IT and even your executives. I think there's so much siloing that goes on in isolation that it's like, well, is patch management part of vulnerability management? Is vulnerability management part of whatever, like GRC? But nobody wants to take ownership. So I know what my opinion is, but as Eric and Cody, who've lived this life for a little bit, what is your take on this?
I'll let Eric speak first. What is your take on that?
You're the guest.
Yes, you, Eric.
You are the guest.
Well, okay. I guess I'll go first. So, you're specifically talking about like VM does scanning, and then you have a separate team that deploys patches, and then you have. So I guess it really depends on your company size, because coming from that large bookstore I won't mention, you do have separate teams that do scanning, and you do have separate teams that do patching. Mainly because of the scale of the network. If you have like 10 devices you have to manage, it wouldn't make financial sense to have a scan team and a patch team and a campaign team or anything like that. So, I mean, it's really a business decision, and that's kind of what I say is a good chunk of VM is turning security into dollar signs and trying to figure out what's best for the company while juggling reducing risk. So it really depends. There's no like hard figure like, okay, well, we've successfully added 1 million IPs to our network. Now we need a patch team or anything like that. So it's case by case. It's really whatever the company wants. And at the end of the day, all we care about is reducing risk. So if one team can reduce the risk, then that's a a grand slam. But if it requires like 10 people, then you should probably separate teams and have a separate manager for each team with oversight.
Definitely. Joe, you just made me happy with that comment. Expecto Patronum. I'm a Harry Potter fan. Everybody knows that. But no, so Eric, what's your take on it, man? And then I'll give mine.
Okay, so I'm going to give you two things. Okay, what Cody just said is right on the money. It depends on where you are in what we call the vulnerability maturity model. Okay, and there is such a thing as the vulnerability maturity model, which, if you really want to know, I will just show it to you, because it's very important that you guys understand. Let's see, is it blinking for you guys?
Flashing. It's blinky. Blinky. Wait, there it goes.
Okay, cool. So this is what they call the VM, or the IT services. And you look at different levels of vulnerability. And I think I have a better one than this, so I'm going to stop for a second. Sorry, you guys keep on talking, but
no, that's fine. So my take on it, and I agree, right? It all depends on the size of the organization and your maturity and things of this nature. One of the big things, though, no matter how big your size is, now it is one thing if you're just one team, right? One team doing vulnerability management, doing patch management, and doing all that. However, as your organization and these teams grow, what I have found is with this siloing, there's this break in communication where IT does not talk to security, does not talk to whatever, because security always says no. And I think as security and vulnerability management goes, we can't always say no. And I've said this before on other episodes. When you are not doing business enablement, but you're just a no guy, you're going to have a lot of rogue IT that's just going to go around, stand up whatever they want, and you're not going to see it.
Yep. Correct. And I always say that security, we're not the police. We're enablers. If you don't do the enablement thing, you are going to get every single wall that you're going to hit with all the teams. But this is what I was talking about, the vulnerability maturity model. And level one is you're just haphazardly scanning, no patching process, no metrics, no anything. When you get to level two, you're looking at more of that process model, that you're just doing a basic scanning and fixing. Level three, now you've got measurements and you've got, scan to patch life cycles. Level four, now you're integrating that threat intelligence into it and doing risk and threat focus scanning, which is what I talked about earlier. And then at level five, which, there's a very little amount of companies that are doing this, where they're not only doing the risk and threat, but they're matching it to the business. Okay? So this is kind of where you're going. So most companies are somewhere between level one and level three. And
yeah, I've seen a few fours, but yeah, you're right. Most are 1 to 3.
So again, like what Cody said was right on the money. Is depends on the organization, depends where they are in their journey. In the organization that I'm currently the VC, so we have, like I mentioned, we have a weekly meeting. The team has done their scanning. They've identified everything. They've done everything risk-based. If there's a threat that's come in, they scan for those vulnerabilities from the threat and provide threat intelligence bulletins combined with the threat intelligence team. And they provide that information to the teams that are going to do the work. Who's going to manage the SECM? Who's going to manage the servers? Who's going to manage the endpoints? Who's going to manage the applications? Middleware, the middleware tier. That's a very big one that nobody does. is like your Adobes, your Readers, your Chromes, your, those other middleware tiers that are doing that. And then we provide that information, and then we, the vulnerability management, will track those things to completion.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. And that, I think that's something that we miss a lot when we talk vulnerability management. I say this a lot. I think us in security, we tend to want to secure everything as soon as possible, right? We want to, just fix your shit, patch it, do whatever it needs to take, mitigate it, put the block in, do whatever, and we lose sight of, what the business has work to do too. The business has to still operate, and we don't know, there may be a reason, and I think we miss that. And security is a team sport. It's with everybody. GRC, your IT, your security, your executive board, everybody needs to be included in security, but you have to be able to get it across to where it's not an expense. And I think that's a lot of what security lacks, is that capability to speak to executives and management and not make it sound like, hey, I just need you to spend more money.
Yeah. Yeah. And another part that you can't really quantify is trust. If you're going to go to every team and tell them to patch everything, and basically their entire job is patching rather than building a product, because at the end of the day, security's, unless you're working for Tenable, of course, but security is not generating a revenue for the company. I don't like to call security a cost center, but vuln management, we don't make money. We save money in a way, if that makes sense. So we save money from like ransomware and stuff like that, security return on investment. So we want to maintain trust with our end users, and end users as people with laptops or people that are developing products. So if we're going with them every single vulnerability and they're just focusing on that, the business is not going to go anywhere. And sorry, my cat is like pricking at my door.
Just let him in.
Oh Lord.
Look, I can't say nothing, because if my cat was down here, he'd be sitting on my shoulder. So, there's that.
It's the feeding window for him. He needs to be fed fairly soon, but he can wait. But yeah, another part of vuln management that I find very pretty fruitful, and I don't see a lot of organizations doing this, is praising teams when they are compliant and they are with an SLA, just giving them that feedback like, hey, we recognize that you guys are on top of your shit. Like, that's pretty badass. Like, I don't know. You almost want to gamify vulnerability management. Like, the first one to patch Log4j, like, you get whatever. Like, make it a little fun. Patching is boring as hell.
If you patch your shit, you get a bonus. You
go to Chuck E. Cheese.
But I do agree with what Joe said here, though. We do neglect physical security in vulnerability management. And think about it. We talked about risk earlier, and we did. And this was a huge thing about risk, is knowing where your risks are. Let's just say there's a vulnerability that comes out and it says CVSS 10. But in order to be a CVSS 10, you have to have physical access to the box, or you have to be able, in some way access it. Well, if that server is behind armed guards plus a gate plus, a biometric door, it is no longer at that level. You can now drop that level down. So it's one of those things where you have to really look at where your systems lie and what it takes to exploit it. And with physical security, we neglect that in vulnerability management a lot. And we don't take into account really what physical security does for us. However, I will say Facebook faced the wrath of physical security when they sent all their BGP routes out the window and couldn't get into the building to fix them. I guess that's great physical security, but at the end of the day, they couldn't even access their shit.
Yeah, and physical security is a good point. So like VM for the most part is going to be software based and all that, but it's all about threat model. Like Amazon is more susceptible to physical based attacks than mom and dad's corner store. I mean, other than robberies, but I'm talking about like cyber attacks. Like no one's going to go in with a thumb drive, plug it into mom and dad's POS system, and run ransomware. It's possible, but people with more funding, with more malicious intent, are going to go after like data centers that Amazon is building and just act as a worker or something like that. Just wear a vest and walk in. It's like, yep, the steel beam goes right there, and then there's a IDF right there, and they do whatever. So that's more susceptible.
You meant point of sale, not piece of. Okay, never mind.
Yeah. Actually, now that I think about it, I think that's how the Target breach happened, was through an internet-facing point of sale system. Or no, it was an HVAC system. I think it was HVAC.
It was an HVAC system that was connected to the network, and they were able to traverse to the POS system.
Oh my God, Lord, that is so bad. That'd be one hell of a write-up if I was on that incident response team. It's like, well, what happened was your little cooler, your AC system was found on Shodan, and this is how we caused a 40 million or whatever the dollar amount was breaches through your damn AC system.
Yeah. So as we're coming to the end here, because we're a little bit above 1 hour and 3 minutes, Cody, anything else you want to tell to our security happy hour team that's watching?
Go on a walk. Don't think about Log4j for the rest of the day. I am coming from a vuln management team from a Fortune 100. Go on a walk. Just try your best. Go on a walk. Take shifts. Even if you don't have shifts, hand some work to a coworker. Go on a walk. They give you the work back. They could go on a walk. Just do something other than be on your computer all day.
Oh, yes. Cyber Warrior.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. And look, all I got to say as we end this show, look, like, comment, subscribe, all those fun things. Check out CyberWarriorStudios.com for all the ways that you can, support the channel, support what we do here. Check out raicescyber.org for all the ways that you can help and take care of an amazing nonprofit organization that is doing great things. And catch us next week. But before next week comes, because yes, I will be doing a show Christmas Eve. Whether or not you want to believe it, I will be doing one. Motivation Monday will be up on Monday, and I will see you all next time.